this is a neighbourhood that just a few years ago was pretty close to where I live. I was about a kilometre or so down the road in Parkhurst. This is Parktown North, and this in particular is Il Contadino, which is the home for Dan Really Likes Wine with Norman Goodfellows this particular week. James Dieck is a chef I know well because he had an extremely well-known restaurant in Parkhurst called Coobs. Some of you may well remember it. Like this, a busy part of town, Parkhurst, so Parktown North is, and especially this spot at lunchtime or dinner time because it's a real favourite amongst so many of the locals. In fact, half the traffic that's blinding past me on either side is, I think, people looking for spaces to come in and grab something to eat. That's exactly what I'm going to do on the show today. Find one of the meals they have in here, not just their great tapas, but some terrific signature dishes, and fingers crossed it might be their pork belly, which I haven't had yet but have heard so much about, and also try some wine with an old friend of mine. Lovemore is the sommelier here, like me, from Zimbabwe, and somebody who loves his wine and has always put together a terrific wine list. Lovemore is not my only guest today though. I'll also be spending some time later on in the show with Matt Day, who you'll know from Klein Constantia, but possibly not from Anwilka, the other project he's working on, where, shock horror, he's not making Sauvignon Blanc, he's actually making some red wine instead. And as you'll discover on the show, it is fine red wine indeed. First though, it's to another great of South African winemaking, Catherine Marshall, who's trod a wonderful path from talking about wine on a beach in Muizenberg to creating South African wine with art to match that is so eye-catching and also has a great story about Mount Everest. It feels on this week on the show that I'm sitting in 1920s Prohibition America. It's got an underground speakeasy feel to it, and I could be sharing a glass of wine illegally with Al Capone. But I'm not in the 1920s, I'm not in an American speakeasy, and I'm not with Al Capone, although I'm with somebody almost as well known, thankfully, for slightly better reasons. This is the Library Food Club, sitting underground in a little corner of Johannesburg. You walk in through a bookcase and it's all very cool and secretive and fun. And when you get downstairs, normally it's for an amazing dinner with a group of people who've booked about 6 months in advance. I'm not here for dinner, instead I'm here for wine. I'm sharing the wine with one of South Africa's great winemakers, Catherine Marshall. Lovely to have you here. How cool is this space?
Oh my God, I love these kind of joints. We have one in Bree Street called the Athletics Club, and it feels like I'm sitting in those 1920 New York jazz bars. I'd love to have met Al Capone, for sure. I think that could have been really cool. But yeah, wonderful to be here with you. It's been a long time.
It has
Dan.
indeed, and we've had numerous conversations over the years, and it's always been quite fierce competition between the delight of the conversation and the delight of the wine, because both are always fabulous. And we're going to jump into the wine for a moment, but I want to take you back because there are loads of people. You fit into that kind of Ken Forrester space where people aren't always sure if Catherine Marshall exists or whether it's just quite a catchy brand name. You very much exist. Tell me a little bit about this wine journey that's brought you into this space you are.
Sure, Dan, how much time do you have? Because it feels like 100 years that I've been doing this. My favorite saying is, you know, it takes 27 years to become an overnight success. And it pretty much feels like that. And so my journey started in 1997 on a beach in Muizenberg with some friends, lots of beer, of course, doing the braai. And we stomped through the night and made 3 barrels of beautiful Shiraz. And so we continued the journey the following year, not knowing that I was actually going to be creating a brand. And in those days, it was called famously the Barefoot Wine Company. But unfortunately for me, I had no idea there was a barefoot company in the US. And so I had to change the name. And so Catherine Marshall is very much me, and I'm very much the brand. And I make the wines. I do the bottle washing and the marketing and the sales and everything that has to be done in order to create these wines. Yeah.
And I think when you have that space, it becomes so personal and so intimate. And I wonder, you've been doing it for a fair amount of time now. When you spot something on social media that a bottle of your wine has been sold at a restaurant in Oslo or seen in a supermarket in Seoul, you know, if you're working for a bigger, more generically named brand, still great wine, but yeah, you're the winemaker at Klein Constantia. Oh, that's pretty cool. My wine's in Norway. But when it's actually Catherine Marshall. Does that still give you a thrill?
Oh my God, it gives me the biggest thrill when I walk into. I mean, I remember I was sitting in Belgium somewhere, some really arbitrary restaurant, and there was a Pinot Noir of mine sitting on the table, and it made me really, really happy because I want to share my wines globally, and I have the most wonderful importers that I work with from this side of Japan, everywhere in between, and all the way across into the US. So I get to travel and I get to meet amazing people and to get to see my wines being enjoyed. It brings me a lot of joy, for sure.
There's a surrealism to being in that space that as we speak now, there could be somebody sitting in Bolivia enjoying a glass of your Pinot Noir. And you've got no idea that that's happening,
No,
but
no.
you are giving people joy around the world.
Yes,
It's such a
yes.
wonderful gift to have.
100%.
And I
Yeah.
think that surrealism links in quite nicely to the artwork on your bottles because it's very hard to miss a Catherine Marshall bottle. And I think there are a lot of people who have gravitated towards them, discovered what's inside is even better than the art, but seen these bottles. Tell me the story behind this look and feel.
Well, Dan, art is very much part of my life. I love the whole idea of art. In fact, if I didn't make wine, I'd probably have done fine art because that's what I enjoy so much. And I've actually started painting now that I have a sort of a little bit of time now. I've seen that my son has taken over a lot of the winemaking side, and I have a great team. So art really started in our wine business with a collaboration with a wonderful person called Hanneke de Klerk, who she resides up the West Coast, and we've become really great friends through the years of using her great artwork, which you will see on the two Pinots, the ladies. And then as my brand grew, I decided that I would tier the brand into three different partitions. So I have the lifestyle brand, which is all about Cork Bay, and they're sort of clean white labels. Then we have the Catherine Marshall brand, which are the Hanneke de Klerk portraits. And we actually have her paintings in our tasting room, and I trade her in wine. So every time she has an art exhibition, the wines are there. And then,
Her paintings are very expensive, so I'm thinking,
Yes.
what, half a case of your wine for a painting? Just looking at the relative quality.
no, we've stuck to the pricing based on very many years ago, so that it's that she gets enough wine for sure. And then my goddaughter Beatrice Fassler, who's the half daughter of the very famous haute couture designer Marion Fassler, is an incredible designer of clothing, of interior, of art, of graphics, whatever she touches. She's just amazing. And so I got her to do the fine art collection, I call them. So these graphics that are on the top end range are from my dear goddaughter Beatrice Fassler. And so that's for me is quite exciting. And the idea came many years ago when I didn't have great labels, and nobody really was doing art on labels. And I got the idea from the Mouton Rothschild brand, where they used very famous artists like Picasso and Matisse and
Our very own Kentridge.
100%. And I love Kentridge. He's one of my favorites.
He's been trying to get on your bottles for years.
Well, I'll have to give him a phone call then.
And there's a natural segue from the art on the outside to the
Yes.
art inside. It can sometimes sound a bit pretentious to talk about wine and winemaking as art, but I think there are so many fundamentals that you share: the creative process, the vision, bringing joy to people through what you create. You work in both a broad and a narrow palette. Broad in that there is always so much expression to your wine, but narrow in that you can't be bothered with a whole pile of grapes. You know what you like, and this is what you want to make. Talk me through that philosophy.
So the philosophy is, first of all, to have a delicious glass of wine.
That's a very good
fundamental.
philosophy.
Yes.
I like that philosophy.
So that has to run through the whole brand. And as I said, we have quite a range of whites and reds, but it must have it must be serious in intent. I think that's also the secondary part of it. And so when you have a mission in front of you, everything else just falls into place. But I also have to say that you cannot do this alone. It looks all glamorous that I'm the front of the brand and I'm talking to you about these wines. But honestly, without my team, I could not do this. And I can project whatever I want on there, and this is the path we're going to take, but it's everybody's collaboration and their bits of energy and their souls that go into ultimately making what I make. Really, the fundamentals for me are climate, soils, and sense of place.
Let's jump into the first one. What are we drinking here, and talk me through it?
Chenin Blanc. I mean, what can I say? I think it's one of South Africa's best exports after diamonds and gold. I think Chenin is it. So what I decided to do with this one is to make it like a serious Chardonnay after being to Burgundy and drinking the great Puy Montrachets and the Chasson Montrachets. I have never forgotten the intense feelings that I had when I drank those wines. I F10 them in my brain. So when it came to creating this wine, I said to myself, I want to make that, but I want to make it using this great South African Chenin, that style. And so I went out to find the grapes that would kind of give me that feel. I can't say it's 100% a Puy Montrachet, but I had to hang my hat on some style that I would look forward to creating. This wine is about 80% Chenin from a wonderful vineyard in Elgin, cool climate. So you get that lovely, fresh, pure line of acidity coming through the wine, almost like licking a wet pebble as well. And then I got a little portion of old bush vine from Bottleray Hills that's got that lovely nectarine flesh, that lovely, lovely kind of, you know, when you bite into a very ripe nectarine and all the juice runs down your chin, that kind of flavor I was looking for, just to kind of flesh in with the scaffolding of the Chenin fruit from Elgin. And next was to use my dear friend Yogi de Beer, who many people use in the industry. He makes his amazing amphora, stoneware amphora, which he crafts himself. He harvests the clay out of the soil, cleans that up, and then molds his amazing amphora. And it takes about a month to make one pot. So he's a great artist in his own right. And to put the Chenin that comes from these two beautiful vineyards into those wonderful pots is going to create something fabulous. And that's exactly what I wanted to do.
I think I've got some sandstone here,
Yes,
if
on the
I'm not
left.
mistaken.
Yes.
So if I am drinking sandstone and I haven't had 11 years doing geology at university and I don't really know what all of this means, what does sandstone allow you as a winemaker to bring out of a Pinot Noir grape?
Okay, so let me first say that vines are generally grown on the top soil where there's quite a lot of sort of organic matter that happens there. So the roots are there, but they are going down deep. And the difference between the two soils would definitely be something like pH and acidity. So geologists would kind of confer with that. The other interesting part of the two differences is that it depends how the winds, the rains, how the vines are reacting on these two soils. And so when you look at Table Mountain sandstone and you hold the rock or the soil in your hand, it's very crumbly and very light. And so the roots can really go down there quite easily, no problem. And so for me to interpret that, the wine is all about etherealness on the nose. It's all about the red fruit spectrum that gets incredibly highlighted in this wine. You go to the clay soils, there the roots really have to struggle because those clays can get very hard in the summertime. So they've got to find these little fissures to go through the cracks of these hard clays. And there is a very high content of iron. So you get that sort of ferrous character coming through into the wine, quite obviously. And that then translates for me into that sort of savory, wet earth, sort of organic-y. You walk through a wet forest and you pick up the oak leaves that have been rotting for a few years. You get that lovely, clean, organic character. So that's what I'm looking for in the Bockerveld Shale wines. And what's interesting is that the Hemel and Aarde Bockerveld Shale is slightly different to the Elgin Shales. Elgin Shales tend to be lighter, whereas the Bockerveld Shales are more fragmented and they have much sort of darker looking, darker redder colors. And it definitely impacts on the acidity dimension, if you will, on these two profiles that are Bockerveld Shales along our coastal regions. So I thought that was pretty cool.
And that is so important. Often we
Yeah.
think of acidity in white wines, and it's sort of obviously pronounced in things like
Yep.
Sauvignon Blanc. But for a wine like this, if you don't get the acidity right, you're going to lose the beauty and magic of the
100%.
wine.
And Pinot generally has a naturally beautiful acidity, so I don't have to do anything in the cellar to get that balance back. So that's a real key for cool climate Pinot. Yeah, on both soils. Yeah.
Okay, so one is sandstone, the other is clay.
Yeah.
A clay vine, surely that doesn't make sense. Clay's kind of sticky and wet and you use it to make pots. Why on earth are you going grapes in this stuff?
Well, it's quite hard clay. They're kind of sedimentary rock kind of characters. And they can have different layers of clay too. You can get white clay, blue clay, red clay, and they all resonate quite differently. In fact, I actually, on one parcel of land in Elgin, there were these three fractions. And what we had to do was literally cut the irrigation. It was a small kind of 2-hectare plot. And literally halfway through the vineyard, the irrigation had to be snipped. So one section would have to have less water than the other. So if you don't know that, you're going to mess it up. You have to really understand what you're working with. And I think that is key to winemaking is what's happening under your feet and how the plants are responding to that.
So you've worked out pretty clearly that I am with somebody who makes absolutely masterful Pinot Noir. We have one more Pinot Noir to sample. And this one, your eyes lit up when this bottle came down on the table, even more than they already are, which leads me to suspect that this one's got something special to it.
Yes, absolutely. Again, the question of why Pinot Noir. You know, when you reach 50, you start asking yourself existential questions about why, what's your purpose, why Pinot Noir. And then I decided that I was going to figure that out for once and for all. But it organically arrived. So I'd always wanted to visit Tibet as a young girl. And I'd read up a lot about it, and we do a lot of serious hiking. And of course, what better place to go and witness the most beautiful mountain on the planet but to go up to base camp Everest. And so we did. My son and I, we took some Pinot in our backpacks and a couple of metal mugs, went to Lhasa, spent some time meeting up with the wonderful Buddhist monks there, checked out where the Dalai Lama lived, went to the beautiful Patola Palace, which is over 1,000 years old. Extraordinary spirituality. And it was kind of in that time, I kind of realized that Pinot has quite a lot of religiosity, like the Burgundians celebrate Pinot in a very religious way. But for me, it was a bit more than that. There was a spiritualness about how this wine feels when you are in the presence of it. And so when we ended up staying with these amazing Tibetan nomads who are yak nomads at the base camp, stayed in their yak tent. Of course, we'd chosen the monsoon to be in these mountains so that their Himalayas were covered. So I said to Jono, okay, we need to leave now. Let's just pretend we're seeing the last 3,300 meters because we were very high up. And so we waltzed up to base camp, 2 hours walking. And it's amazing because as we were walking up, the curtain of cloud just opened up. And there was the last bit of peak. It was extraordinary. And to have your Pinot there, 5,200 meters above sea level, drinking this and looking at that most exceptional mountain from Tibet, which is very spiritual, it kind of all came to me in that moment that this is what I have to produce. A wine that is almost like a climber, you know, that every year you have to get to the next level and you need a lot more skill and grit because the air is very thin there and the competition is very rife for making a great Pinot. So every year that's what is presented to me based on the elements that I'm working with is to climb and to get to the next level in my journey with Pinot. So this was brought about in 2016 was my first vintage. And on the label is the geographical cartography map of where we actually sat on base camp looking up at the last bit of Mount Everest with our Pinot. So that was an amazing moment.
I'm
very proud of that.
I'm a sucker for stories around wine. That is a terrific story.
Yeah.
And it links so many wonderful things to not just the wine, but also just to your philosophy. And I think the only thing that's possibly slightly different is Everest just stays there. Whereas I know for you as a winemaker, your Everest changes every year because you are continuing to look at what can I do to make this just a little bit better.
I don't need to get to the top. It's the same as as a climber. If I was a climber, the idea of getting to the top wasn't important to me. And for me, the Pinot is the same. I don't need to make the best in the world. It's the journey of doing it that for me is more interesting.
Well, it's a journey largely without you realizing, you've taken so many of us on with you,
Oh,
whether
it's
it's me
great.
sitting here in this
Yeah.
conversation,
Yeah.
or it is that person we mentioned earlier in Peru, or the guy having dinner in Tokyo. And that's such
Yeah.
a wonderful element of wine. But the fact that you add all of these personal touches from the art to going to base camp to this geological obsession of yours that's given you such an understanding is terrific. So
Yes.
thank you. It is always an absolute delight to spend some time with you.
Wonderful,
And thank you for
Dan.
some rather nice wine.
Yeah, beautiful. Keep
So there we
drinking
go.
Pinot.
It is always such a joy catching up with Catherine Marshall. The wine is exceptional, but it's also the storytelling, the history, the art, the Kilimanjaro adventure. There are so many layers to her wine story, and listening to them unfold over a glass or two of particularly good wine, especially that Pinot Noir, is a delight. So that was the Library Food Club. It's one great spot to grab a meal in Johannesburg. This is another, and behind me you can hear the kitchen. In front of me you can see the results of the kitchen. But before I climb into the food, I need to find out what I'm eating, why I'm eating it, and why I'm pairing it with something special. And the man to do that is an old friend of mine. Lovemore, nice to see you again. Maskati Sekuru.
It's very good to see you again. This has been a long time.
It has, and very annoyingly, since the last time I saw you, you don't look older at all, and you're clearly in a good space. I think it's the wine that's keeping you
I'm
young.
drinking a lot of wine.
Drinking lots of wine.
Yeah.
Remind us of people who haven't seen you on the show before, your wine journey and meeting James and becoming part of this group.
Okay, it's like when I joined Chef James Diak, that was 2015. Then he started teaching me, I started getting interested in wines. Then on 2017, he introduced me to a lady called Debbie. That's when I started doing my wine studies. So I did my level 1 W set on 2017, and in 2018 I did my W set level 2 with support from Chef James. So I think you still remember last time when we met, it was before COVID. Yeah.
It was
When-
indeed.
yeah.
Those distant times we try to
Times,
forget.
yeah. So today I'm here with you with our pork belly, which is our signature dish.
Ooh.
Yeah, as you know, this is our small baby Italian restaurant. All our products are coming from the farm, like Janet is doing the farming in Magaliesberg. So like 80% of our food is coming from the farm. So what we normally do here is like our menu is seasonal. What you get from the farm is what we deliver to the people, and just to get some beautiful wines, lovely wines to pair with it. So today you're gonna do our Blackwater cow Tella Syrah.
Now, this is
Yes,
wine I know
Cow
well, but
Syrah.
I haven't had this for a while. I asked you to choose any wine you want.
No.
Why have you chosen this one, Lovemore?
I've chosen this one because I really love it, and Syrah with the dish which I made for you today, it's a pork belly. It's a fatty dish. So it's a Syrah and a fatty dish. They pairs very well because the Syrah cleans up your palate as quick as possible. So this is a 2019 vintage from Blackwater. As you know, a Syrah from a hot climate, a hot region from the Swartland. It's a very one of the best Syrahs. So it's quite, it gives you those. Just 1 second, let's.
Oh, that is so elegant.
So elegant. It's giving you those the pepper, spicy on your palate.
Oh, it's glorious.
It's
there is-
bold, dry, smooth tannins.
Just something about Swartland Syrah,
Yes,
isn't there?
Swartland
It's
Syrah is-
irresistible.
Yeah.
All right. So this is the Cultella. Listen, this is Francois Hasbrook, who's an outstanding winemaker. So you've
Yes, yeah.
chosen something fantastic here.
This is beautiful.
Oh,
This is awesome. I really love his wines, especially this Syrah is outstanding. It's awesome. You can try it with the pork belly, then you'll tell me the results. Yeah.
all right. Well, that's exactly what I am going to do. Pork belly is something I love, but it can be really, really rich. So You do want something that just
So,
offsets it a bit.
yeah, this is not too rich because it's a wild boar pork belly. So wild boar pork belly doesn't have much fat. It's like more meat than fatty.
Oh, I feel like I'm in Asterix and Obelix
Yeah.
eating wild boar. Now this wine tasted brilliant before. I'm going to see if it does the same after I've had the
After
wine.
having a glass of wine.
Oh,
You see the fat is like melting in your palate.
just
Then the
fades
wine
away.
comes, it's like cleaning all the...
You know what? I almost believe you love more, but I think I'm going to need some more just to be sure.
Let's give it another chance.
Oh, that's good. It is a delightful combination. No surprise that you've got it just right,
Right.
because you know your wine so well and you know James's food so
Food,
well. Does it still excite you as a sommelier to find new ways of bringing food and wine together?
That's what we are doing on daily basis with James. That's why each and every time when something comes from the farm, we like switching it around, trying everything and see which way works much better than the other one. So that's why I always like creating new dishes with new different types of wines.
Oh, so
Yeah.
people come down to Il Contadino. There is this to try, but one of the real appeals, I think, of Il Contadino is there are so many little dishes you can try, pair them with all sorts of different wines, and just have this very wide-ranging food and wine experience.
Yeah, that's why we do like canapes, let's say, because we are still doing what we used to do at Coops, like doing Coops at home, whereby we do like small canapes, like we do like small starters, like arrangines, whatever. Then we play around with our wines. Then from there we come up with good results. Then we produce good food to be paired with good wines.
It's a winner
That is
every
it.
time, and
Yeah.
this is a great combination. I might have to try it just a little bit more before we go,
You go.
because it does come together nicely. Lovell, thank you. You oversee a great wine list. James does the food to match, and that combination
Same.
is so strong. So lovely to see you again, and thanks for having me at Il Contadino.
Thank you so much.
As we say in our shared homeland,
Yeah.
tatenda cheju zeguru.
Tinotenda zvikuru. Mufambe zvakanaka.
And if you don't speak Shona, what Lovell has just said is, you're welcome, Dan. You're the best looking person we've had at the restaurant in years. Of course, he didn't say that, but he did tell me to enjoy the rest of my afternoon, which I will, working through this particular dish. As I finish it off, let's head over to another part of town, the Great Domains HQ, where Matt Day is up, and you might be thinking, that's Klein Constantia. Well, no, it's his other project, Anwilka, and delivering a rather nice red with some pretty high-profile backing out in Stellenbosch. Over the years of Dan Really Likes Wine, I've had numerous interactions with an annoyingly youthful-looking winemaker called Matthew Day, and my conversations with Matt have always been around Klein Constantia, the beautiful historic Constantia property that is home, amongst other things, to dozens and dozens and dozens of world-class examples of Sauvignon Blanc, and a sweeter wine that's done rather well from time to time around the world. Never though, Matt, in all of our time together, and I'm not sure why this is, have we spoken about your other project, because you are that good and that successful. You've actually got 2 wine estates.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, it's quite unusual for me actually talking about Anwilka. So a couple of years ago, with all that happened at Klein Constantia and all the success of what I'd done with Sauvignon Blanc and Van der Constance, the winemaker at Anwilka left. And they looked at me and said, well, Matt, you're quite good at what you're doing here. We'll give you a chance at Anwilka as well. It's actually this wine over here is my first one from Anwilka. And for me, it's a complete different ballgame. So playing around with red wine, we don't really do at Klein Constantia. I'm complete Sauvignon Blanc nut, and we always talk about that. I think we make 10 different Sauvignon Blancs, which is great. Now we make 2 different red wines from Stellenbosch. And the key here is Stellenbosch is king for making fantastic world-class red blends.
And at a very, very simple level, this would seem like way too much work because you're already running such a big, well-known, celebrated operation. How, from a logistical perspective, are you able to still run Klein Constantia, but also head up to Stellenbosch and look after things there as well?
You can see all my grey hairs, Dan, so it's getting rough. No, fortunately, we have a great team. So I have a very good assistant winemaker at Klein Constantia, and our farm manager at Anwilka is the assistant winemaker there as well. But my day starts off like this. We start picking at 4 o'clock in the morning at Klein. So I get to work at 3:30 in the morning, get everything running there. Once all the grapes are coming in nicely, I get in the car and drive an hour to Stellenbosch in the morning at about 10 o'clock. Spend about 2 to 3 hours there, have lunch, then drive back and have lunch at Klein Constantia, and then we finish with the day at Klein Constantia. So it's not fun, it's a lot of driving, it's a lot of traveling, but with a good team, it's possible. The other thing is I can taste numerous wines, numerous grapes from different areas. It's completely unique for any winemaker.
If this was me, every time I walked into a bar, met people at a party, I own 2 wine estates, one in Constantia and one in Stellenbosch, and it all sounds quite glamorous and fun
fancy,
and cool. But from what you say, it sounds like you need a 36-hour, especially a 36-hour day when it comes to harvest.
No, it's madness. So even just getting out to promote Anwilka is quite difficult because a lot of my time is spent on Klein Constantia. So I need more time in the day, or I need more good people involved around Klein Constantia. But the challenge is there, and I love it. So it's good fun.
The last time we were with you at Klein Constantia, I made what's probably the gravest error of my Dan Really Likes Wine career. And I asked you a question about Sauvignon Blanc, and we had to edit out 17 hours of footage by the time you finished, because you do, by your own admission, have a medical obsession with Sauvignon Blanc. Now, all of a sudden, you find yourself in a very different part of the world. Is it a different itch to scratch? Is it filling a gap that maybe you didn't realize wasn't there in your wine adventure?
Yeah, so for sure. So no one winery can say that they're the best at everything. And what I do is I call it the shotgun approach in South Africa. It's literally take a shot, spread a whole lot of pellets out, and you hit here and there and everywhere. And sometimes you have a good wine from one wine farm. So to go out and say that you make 3 really good world-class wines at one wine farm is very difficult. Hence Stellenbosch works, and that's the core of making a fantastic red wine. We couldn't do it in Constantia. There are great red wines in Constantia, but it's not the same level as what we're looking at. So we're looking for perfection in 3 different tiers of what we can do. As a winemaker, it is challenging, but it's very fulfilling in terms of that.
2 very distinctive areas, Constantia with those lovely cool breezes coming in, or False Bay and the aspect as you head your way up the mountain, particularly to some of your higher vineyards. Stellenbosch generally a bit warmer, depending on where you are, can be a little flatter. What is the key difference between these 2 that dictates what you're able to make so well?
Sure. So there's actually a lot of similarities between the 2 as well, in that both farms are 7 kilometers from the ocean and 7 kilometers from False Bay. So we still get that nice cool sea breeze into the vineyards.
You don't often think about that with Stellenbosch, do you? Because you don't always see the sea as you would from Klein Constantia looking down across the water. And that air conditioning unit that the ocean is a little hidden from view.
For sure. So, I mean, both farms, if you sit in the tasting room, you can see the beautiful view of the ocean. Klein, you have to go a little bit higher up. So, and Anwilka has that. So we're literally on 96 Winery Road. Sorry, 96 Winery. It's my favorite restaurant in the area. We're on Winery Road. We're just behind Le Riche, and we're close to Ken Forrester. So it is that benefit of having the Helderberg, but the Helderberg without the slopes. And depending on which winemakers you chat to in Stellenbosch, they ask you which side of the main road you're on to Somerset West, and they judge you on that. So Anwilka is on that coastal side of the road. It is very flat. It is very homogeneous in terms of the soil and the lay of the land and everything. But the nice thing is it's a small farm. There's only about 8 different blocks. Shiraz, Cabernet are key, and then we've got Malbec and Petit Verdot to play around with. The other thing that we're doing there is we're focusing in on the microclimate, on the soil. We're trying to become, complete gurus in terms of understanding it, in terms of understanding the technology and the terroir around it. And we're trying to make micro-vinified wines from that piece of terroir, kind of like what we're doing in Klein Constantia. Klein Constantia is just a lot bigger, and we have a whole lot of different other pockets of terroir at Klein Constantia because of the slope. So it's quite tough. It's a flat piece of land, and this is It was Andy Erickson in Napa Valley who taught me this, and I was working at a very little winery for him. And he would literally take a tree and he would kind of pin out where the shadow of that tree was, and he would make one barrel from that tiny little spot of land, and that's what would go into the final blend to make a perfect wine. We're trying to do exactly the same at Anwilka, create the story about a whole lot of different microclimates and put that into a fantastic wine.
It sounds like painstaking work. You've already alluded to the hours that you work. Does the reward match the effort?
So the biggest reward that I have is actually working with two of our shareholders in Anwilka. So Hubert de Bois, who owns Chateau Angelus, and Bruno Prats. It's the Prats family that used to own Costa Estonel in Bordeaux. So I get to work with two legendary winemakers in the world. Between the three of us, we have over 100 years of winemaking experience. And I've got a tiny little snippet of that. So working with those guys, getting some of their expertise, some of their passion for winemaking. As a young winemaker, it is fantastic.
You've already referenced Ken Forrester, who you're working just down the road from. I know he doesn't speak to you because you're not only making Chenin Blanc, which of course is what Ken believes everybody should do. Right next door, you've got Lariche, and there are a few people who've mastered the art of Cabernet Sauvignon Stellenbosch, quite like the Lariche family, the two generations. That would suggest to me that you're in an area which will allow you to make wines of great elegance, but also great intensity in that space. What is the end result? If somebody's never had a bottle of Anwilka, what are we expecting when we pour a glass?
So Anwilka, so in terms of the varietals that are going into the blend of it, it's predominantly Cabernet and Shiraz. When I started there, I always thought it was going to be a Shiraz-driven blend because I like that style. I like the opulence of Shiraz. But what we later realized is Cabernet's king. So it always gives you that mid-palate, that structure, that backbone to the wine. And this started off as a Bordeaux blend because of the Bordeaux influence in it. They had Merlot in it, they had Malbec in it, they had Petit Verdot in it. Merlot was absolutely ghastly. I think they had a bit of Cabernet Franc as well. It was just too green, too leafy. So in terms of what to expect, is you expect the Cabernet that you get in a Bordeaux blend, but the Shiraz in this wine brings out the elegance, brings out the fleshiness, the fruit to it. You put the two together and you can create that perfect blend. So we're kind of looking at a little snippet of Bordeaux without being Bordeaux, with a touch of South Africa to it. In that Hubert and Bruno are masters of blenders. They are masters of tannin extraction and palate weight and just getting that right during the fermentation process. And I've never had so many arguments in my life before about blending. You know, it's one wants this, I want this, the other one wants that, and we constantly strive for perfection. So in the 2019 blend, it actually took us about 4 months to get the blend right. And this was during COVID, so it was Zoom sessions. We'd send samples out and you'd have a Zoom tasting and all argue about the blend, and they all accuse me of sending the wrong wines out and everything. But that's what it's all about. It's the fun behind it.
As somebody who makes the world-class Sauvignon Blanc that you do, as somebody who's the custodian, almost as much as winemaker of the Vin de Constance, there's not a wine that you will send out, I know, that does not match your seal of approval. That said, there are the established Klein Constantias, and Anwilka is still very much the project that came thereafter. Have you closed the gap? How close are you in your assessment of the quality of what you're making in the two spaces?
So the big difference between the two is the one is known and the other one is unknown. You know, it's like the little underdog, but that's its great attribute, is it's undiscovered. It's that wine that you have to go out and find. So in terms of quality of Anwilka, it is of that Klein Constantia stature. It is, you know, it is an iconic red wine. We just haven't gotten out there and told the story enough in the last couple of years. And I think that was a big reason in my introduction as winemaker at Anwilka is I'm getting out, we're getting more passion behind it. I'm actually telling the right story behind the brand, and we'll get it out there. I mean, watch the space. It's going to be fantastic.
It is a great story. I've had some of the wine. It's a delight, and you've tapped into a really cool little part of the world to produce what you are. It does lead me to ask the one obvious question that every wine person in the country will ask. How long until the Anwilka Sauvignon Blanc comes out?
It's going to be Anwilka made like Sauvignon Blanc, I guess.
There we go. Constantia's resident Sauvignon Blanc maestro, who's got a dab hand at producing the sweeter styles as well, now has not a new project, but one that I think is finally starting to get the attention it deserves. It's Anwilka next door to Lariche, and it's giving Christo a run for his money. The diversity of winemakers is sometimes underrated. Somebody like Ken Forrester, for instance, who we know for Chenin Blanc, is also a dab hand at making reds. In the case of Matt Day, we know he's a wizard with Sauvignon Blanc and makes some decent sweet wine as well. But that Anwilka red is exceptional. And I think we're going to start to see more and more and more of it as a brand, as it emerges out of the shadows of his other operation and becomes something very mainstream in its own right. So that's it for the show. I finished off that pork belly, demolished the entire thing. It was terrific. And that Francois Hasbrook wine was the perfect accompaniment. Swartland Syrah is world renowned for a reason. Now, it's not the only wine I can have. In fact, over my shoulder, you'll see a whole range of stuff that is available from some really big names in South African wine. Also some very small names who make wine that's often quite hard to get hold of. And that just adds to the appeal of dropping in on Il Contadino. Throw in the expertise of Lovemore and the fine dining of James Dieck in a very, very relaxed urban environment. And you've got in Il Contadino a space that's got many regulars who, for a very good reason, have this as their favourite. That wraps us up for the show this week. I might find a time for a glass or two before I depart on the back of that excellent Syrah. A big thank you to Matt Day. Thank you too to Catherine Marshall, who joined us a little earlier on in the show. And in particular, some exceptional Pinot Noir, although her Riesling is also well worth looking out for, as is a reservation here at Il Contadino. If you haven't been, do come along. That wraps us up for Dan Really Likes Wine this week with Norman Goodfellows. See you back again next time. Goodbye.